You're ready to go, Norma.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. It is 7:07 p.m. on Tuesday, September 8th, and I now call to order the 2059th meeting of the City of College Place City Council. Will the clerk please take roll call?
Yes. Councilmember Bobbitt,
Present.
Councilmember Cleveland,
Present.
Councilmember Peterson,
Present.
Councilmember Nyhagen,
Present.
Councilmember Selby. She was
Present.
on here. Oh, there she is. Okay. Councilmember Sherman is not at a place where she has good service, so she will not be here with us tonight. And Councilmember Trope.
Present.
Okay. We also have City Administrator Rizzatello, Finance Director Carlton, Chief Tamaris, and Human Resource Director Doring, and Deputy Clerk Holm and myself.
And the mayor.
And
Great,
of course, the mayor. We do have a quorum.
great, thank you. Okay, will you please now join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Now, Councilmember Bobbitt will lead us in my invocation to get us started.
Marge is able to do it. Do you want her to go ahead?
No, go ahead, Jerry.
Okay, let's bow our heads. Our kind Father in heaven, we thank you for this opportunity to get together as a council, and we want to ask for your presence here during our discussions, during our decisions. This we pray in Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, ma'am, Councilmember Bobbitt. It is now time for public comment. Did anyone submit a comment or arrange to speak?
They did not.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then we're going to move on to our consent agenda. It consists of approving the agenda for today, September 8th, 2020, approving the council minutes from August 25th, 2020 regular meeting. Is there a motion?
And excusing Councilmember Sherman.
And excusing
I
council.
added last minute, sorry.
Yes,
Councilmember Trope, so move.
great, thank
Councilmember
you. Is
Cleveland, second.
there any discussion? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? Great, thank you. The ayes have it. The motion is passed.
I have a question, Mayor.
Yes,
On the
sir.
consent agenda, I didn't think we needed to have discussion. There was a concern about an item, we would move it to the regular agenda. Is that correct?
That's correct, but it would just be brought up at that point.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Okay, we're going to move on to presentations, and our Chief Tamaris is going to present our August Yard of the Month recipient.
Yes, hello, Council. It's my pleasure to introduce the August College Place Yard of the Month. The August Yard of the Month recipients are the Washburn family. They've lived in their home for 4 years now, and they're very excited to have received this award.
Very cute. How fun. Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
I know them.
I was just gonna say, if anybody knows them, make sure you tell them it was a good picture.
Definitely.
Okay, on to public hearings. There are no public hearings on the agenda tonight, so next item would be our action items, and we have no action items on tonight's agenda. So we're moving along quickly. And then this is where it's going to take a screeching halt because now we're to administrative reports. And we have several on the agenda tonight. So Mr. Rizzatello, he's going to start us off with the creation of the chapter 8.28.
Thank you, Mayor. So what's before you, just to review, because this is an introduction, is a draft litter code. A number of concerned residents and then some members of some of our advisory committees reached out to the mayor and myself to discuss a draft litter code modeled after a lot of stuff that's going on in North Carolina, just so that way, it's encouraging that littering all over the county and the city. And if there's purposeful littering, then it's a sliding scale fine schedule, a lot like code enforcement, and then and or community service as found by a judge. Mike Denny was key in working on this and just acting as counsel and talking through what a lot of folks would like to see. So that's what's before you, just examine for a future council meeting. It's based heavily on successful efforts in North Carolina, but it's tied to our general penalty ordinance and nuisance ordinance. There is a very basic language about litter in some of the state RCWs, but it just doesn't dovetail nicely within our code. And this just essentially packages everything nicely together with our general penalty code and chapter 1 and nuisance code. So that is all this is.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Rizzatello. Are there any questions or comments? We'll go ahead and start with Mr. Bobbitt.
Yes, I have a comment. It's sad that we have to codify this. I see the necessity of it, but growing up as a young person, being taught respect for other people's property and respect for our country, and if I see trash, to pick it up, it's kind of sad we have to write it down and make some penalties for doing it. What I'm saying is just kind of sad to see that happening, I guess. But I understand the need to codify it and get it in writing.
Well, hopefully it's not something we would have to use very often. Mr. Cleveland, any questions or comments?
Yeah, a couple comments. One, do we have any plans to advertise this as on signs and the like? Because I think that just having a sign that says, $250 fine for littering or whatnot might help control it a bit. I guess my other question though was, what would be the best way to report it when you see it?
Well, I mean, the way I would view this is a tool law enforcement can use, or our special enforcement officer. So if they see it, this is something that they can utilize. Likewise, I would say if residents are observing heavy littering, contacting our police department, that's a good first step as well. And I would also agree that the signage would be in order. So definitely, if this was adopted, I would have counsel with Public Works Department to get necessary signage up in key locales.
Okay. If someone did report it, I just remember a couple of years ago, and I don't see this often, but I just remember seeing someone throw like a coffee out of a window and scattering it on the ground. And I was thinking, like, if I did try and report that, would I have to, how involved would I have to be? Would it be like report to the police, look up the license plate number and let it go, or?
Troy, maybe you could answer that.
Yeah, so can you repeat the question one more time for me?
Yeah, how involved would the reporter, if someone wanted to report littering, say, like I saw someone throw a coffee out of a moving vehicle, how involved would they have to be? Do they just report it and then they're done, or would they have to like be involved if the person wanted to fight the fight and go to a judge?
Yeah, so in the state of Washington, an infraction has to be witnessed by a police officer.
Oh, okay.
So they would have to see it.
So it's really only the police that can see it then, but
That's unless it's unless it's criminal nature. Criminal could be witnessed by someone else, a third party, but an infraction has to be witnessed by a commissioned police officer.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you. That answers my question.
You bet.
Mr. Peterson?
Yeah, I was just reading through it here. Got about 2/3 of the way down, so I apologize. Is this littering on private property or property that's owned by the person that's littering?
So, so the way this is written is it's for essentially public property, and then also private property as well, for folks who like, folks passing by or things like that. It's a consistent issue. So again, it just provides a tool for law enforcement.
And I know that's kind of but obviously that litter on private property can spread and be blown. And as it says there, and is it section C there or thereabouts, or excuse me, D on it? Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Thank you. Councilmember Nyhagen, any questions or comments?
None, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Selby?
No comments at this time.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Trope?
I guess quick question, comment. I assume, picking up where Lauren left off, if I wanted to park a big piece of trash in my front lawn, this would not be the ordinance that would cover that. Only if I put a big piece of trash in somebody else's yard.
Yeah. So this is putting trash somewhere else's yard. As far as if you're putting stuff in your own property, depending if it's like, just some, it would be against our nuisance code. That's the short answer of that. And then there's various regulations within that. If it's something that essentially junk or things of that sort. So this is us dealing with the litter.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So, as we move on, if you have any further questions or comments, please raise your hand, your little hand, your Zoom hand, I guess we should call it. Okay, so we're going to move on to Mr. Rizzatello's presenting on the Safe Walk project.
Thank you, Mayor. This is just the brief report we turned into state, more of a FYI for City Council. Last year, our previous engineering technician was successful in receiving a $68,000 grant from Washington Traffic Safety Commission. Cool thing is with this is that our walkability as far as ramps that do meet ADA, ones that don't meet ADA, and then some prioritization from an engineering perspective, and then also outreach to community. It's all within the GIS data and then this report. So it's just good to have an authoritative data set on the pedestrian infrastructure, because prior to this, we really did not. So this was just great work. I wanted to make sure that the City Council was aware of this as we just closed out the grant and submitted report, and then we have all of the data sets. So it's just a great thing to have, and it'll allow us in the future prioritize sidewalks, and then also also, as we get a new engineering technician on board, one of the things we will be working on is the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act transition plan, essentially prioritizing the ramps and so forth. So this will help in that regard.
Thank you. Very good. Okay, any questions or comments, Mr. Bobbitt?
Not at this time.
Okay, Mr. Cleveland?
No comments or questions?
Thank you. Mr. Peterson?
Mike, real quickly, this works in conjunction with now, I don't have it in front of me, but the grant we got for the sidewalk gap replacement, how does this dovetail with that at all, or does it?
So think of this as like a phase 2, if you will. So the sidewalk gap replacement, the one that we're going to be constructing, that was with a community development block grant. And I would say that concept triggered going after this grant because when we put in the community development block grant, it was merely thinking about what gaps would be most compelling to the state and link the most landmarks, and the gaps on Bay Davis and 12th made a lot of sense. But past that, there's a lot of random gaps in this community, and trying to develop a methodology and then go forward, it was key. So that's what this report did. So that last grant we filed earlier this summer for another round of sidewalks was actually based on this work, because B Street and a lot of the other ones, that was next up on the list in 8th. So that this helped direct that.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
Good question. Okay, Councilmember Nyhagen, any questions or comments?
No, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Selby?
I have a comment and then a question, I think. First, Mike, I've always been so pleased with your abilities to find grants everywhere. And now I'm really pleased to know that you're training the next generation to do that. So good job.
Yeah.
My question is, I owned a house once where there was a condition on the title that when they put sidewalks in, that I had to pay for the sidewalk in front of my house. Because by the time the house was built, they were requiring sidewalks, but there weren't any sidewalks anywhere. And so they're like, well, we're not going to require sidewalks in front of one house. So I notice the one I noticed the most is the one in front of Plant Services on Bade between 6th and 8th.
Yeah.
Are we to require like larger landowners or commercial or anybody to help pay for some of their sidewalks?
That's something that can definitely be looked at as far as a lot of what the improvements that the university has made over time. Historical improvements, no. I would say future improvements, definitely yes, because we were having discussions with them, like when they were going to be doing some dorm improvements and some other projects end up being delayed because of COVID, stepping up to help with the sidewalks. I would mention that prior to those discussions that we've had with them, we actually got the grant to put a sidewalk through in front of Plant Services. So in that case, we got outside money to go build it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Councilmember Trope, any questions or comments?
No question.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to the next item, Mr. Rizzatello was going to present on the water conservation programming item.
Okay, so with everything else going on, I haven't had time to go really deep into this, but a couple of council meetings ago, there was some discussion by some city council members on what types of like water conservation programs exist in some communities that may mimic us, and essentially what would that look like. And in Eastern Washington and also the area of Idaho nearest to us, there are 2 cities that have such programs, and they also have declining aquifer like we do. City of Pullman and City of Masco. So Pullman, Washington has this, and then Masco, Idaho doesn't. It's under the auspices of what's called the Palouse Basin Aquifer Committee. The numbers I found that were most detailed were actually out of the City of Masco, Idaho's comprehensive water system plan. A lot of what they do is within their rate model. What they do is they acquire essentially bathroom and kitchen faucet aerators, leak detection tablets, things like that to distribute to the ratepayers. And then that essentially helps lessen the amount of water utilized, especially since they have aquifer issues similar to what we do. So what I did is there is a document in there called Masco Water Conservation Programming Cost, and it just itemized a lot of what they do well, because they have like toilet rebates and Xeriscape rebates, things like that. And what I did is essentially figured out what that cost would be if you reduced it to the size of like our population and then ratepayers, and then factored in inflation. Because this plan for Masco was done around 2012. So trying to bring it up to 2021 dollars. So just to put it in perspective, to mimic what Masco, Idaho does, where they provide those devices and things to encourage Xeriscape and things like that, the estimated cost of that in 2021 dollars to mimic what they do would be a little over $11,000. So I just wanted to make sure I did my due diligence, because it was a meeting a while back, but there was a request to just essentially look into a little bit what some other locales near us are doing. And I would say Masco and Pullman have like the most mature of these programs. So just something to consider. I know in our water system plan that we're doing a goal that the Department of Health pretty much enforces on a lot of the communities, is trying to conserve water, because it is a finite resource. So this is just one such option to do that. So I just wanted to provide this as more of like a food for thought type thing, and any comments or direction that you may have on this matter.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzatello. Okay, any questions or comments, Mr. Bobbitt?
Not at this time.
Okay, Mr. Cleveland? Okay, we'll come back to Mr. Cleveland, I think. Oh,
No comments.
okay. Mr. Peterson?
Mike, thank you so much for getting that. That's it's always helpful to put a dollar amount when you're looking at it. You have no idea, you know, what it could be, and that's food for thought. And that's as you said, we may be the state may be initiating some of this also. One other thing I would add, I think I've seen some communities have educational blurbs. An example was not running the water while you're brushing your teeth and things like that. And it was amazing some of the calculations on just simple behavioral modifications we can do, how many thousands of gallons that can save over a year as a community or more. So anyway, thank you so much, Mike.
Yep.
Councilmember Nijhagen?
No, thank you, Mike. No questions.
Councilmember Selby?
No comments or questions.
Okay, Councilmember Trope?
A couple questions, Mike. If I understood correctly, the $31,000 roughly that you had in the figure, would be the cost of the rebates, so lost revenue, if you will, right?
So the number that I circled, so there's essentially 2 conservation packages in there. One is essentially conservation package A, which is on the first page. And that has the figure of like when you just started out, what the estimated cost is. And then conservation package B is basically going about roughly 5 years or so into it when it's more of a known quantity. So if we were to mimic what Moscow does, it would be predicted that it would cost us essentially the $11,275.37. That's on the page one. And then basically the multiple years into it, that figure correct would go up to the $31,410. At least that's what was identified in the plan that Moscow did. And then what I did is reduced it by our ratepayer size and then added in inflation for all the years from 2012.
My question is that basic, that's not a cost to the city, that's a loss of revenue to the city?
Yeah.
Do we know how much water we save for that? So $31,000 in 5 years is going to be worth, 65 million gallons of water or something?
Oh, I could get that figure for you. I had it. I just didn't have put it on this.
And that's cool. I'm not asking for that. I'm thinking long term before we adopt something like this. If somebody's going to tell me I get a rebate, that's great.
Yeah.
I'd also like to know what the benefit is in terms of water we're going to save, because I think that makes more impact to people. Frankly, solar's easy because you can plug your solar into the grid and you can basically get paid for having excess electricity. I don't think you have to convince people of that, but this is something that I think people have more and more interest in what their bang for the buck is. I get $20 back, and as a result, we save, 5 salmon or something.
Yep. I can definitely get that figure.
It's really good work. I like how you did what I could see there. So thank you for that. I think this is a real neat opportunity for our city and worth further exploration.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Thank you. Now we're moving on to some presentation on additional CARES Act funds from Mr. Rizzatello.
Okay. So
oh, sorry. Somebody has a hand up?
Councilmember Cleveland.
Okay, sorry, I can't.
At the risk of going on a tangent, maybe just briefly here, we don't really have a natural water source that replenishes itself particularly quickly in College Place. Just throwing the idea out there, and I may have mentioned it before ages ago, but it's my understanding the city of Walla Walla has some sort of reservoir that they have kind of up Mill Creek. Is that correct?
So they do get most of their drinking water from Mill Creek. A lot of that is governed around their water rights, and then essentially what the Umatilla tribe, because that's on tribal ground up there, essentially what they will let them pump from that watershed. So I would say I've looked into that. Our ability to get water from there is limited just because of some statutes around the water rights and then tribal rights as well.
Okay, so that gets complicated. I was just looking for opportunities where we could partner with someone who has a natural replenishing water supply.
I mean, over time, one of the things I've always directed our engineering consultants to look at was with our wastewater treatment plant, when we upgrade that, we're doing the Class B standard, but I've asked them to make sure that whatever we do out there, that in the far future, if we needed to go to Class A standard and do aquifer storage recovery, that we could. So that is one way. I will say that the water in the what's in the aquifer, the level of decline is a little bit concerning to me, just because, like, for instance, in Pullman and Moscow, they've been doing this for a number of years, and basically their water levels have been going down about like half a foot a year or so. It's a major issue to them. And I mean, we're starting to get better around here, but when I moved here, one of the things that was a little shocking, number versus, I would say, response from the region, is that there's certain gauging stations within the valley here where the water is going down 4 feet a year versus that half a foot. So it is a concern that we definitely need to get on top of for our continued economic vitality and livability.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments for discussion?
No.
Okay. Mr. Rizzatello, you want to speak on the additional CARES Act funds?
Yeah, so now the time is going on. There is CARES Act money that's starting to trickle down finally. Just thought I would let you all know of 2 opportunities. One is that community development block grant. There's actually additional monies filtering down. And as such, what the state's trying to do, because they want less contracts to supervise with this, is they're encouraging organizations to join via like a consortium. So there's one agency that's governing the contract, and then the others like pay into it. But for each agency that joins one of these consortiums, there's basically a $3,000 bonus. So you'll see in the email, what we're working towards is City of Walla Walla doesn't have to deal with this issue because they're a direct community development block grant recipient. So they don't deal with the state at all. They just get extra direct money from the feds because of how big population wise they are. We aren't governed the same way. So we would get ours from the state. So what we're all doing, I mean, if you all wanted to, we could pull out and go at it on our own, but I would recommend we stay in this consortium because we're having dialogues around this, is that the county would take the lead. And then we've had discussion through the county council on housing, which I'm chair of, essentially how does this money get divvied up? So what it amounts to from the CDBG component is almost an extra $120,000. So the general concept is utility assistance payments. So of that, we were thinking 40%, and that would go to Blue Mountain Action Council and help with folks who are behind on their water, wastewater, stormwater bills due to COVID related issues. Number 2 is micro enterprise small business assistance. So allocating more money to that small business relief fund and getting further down the list. So that would be 30%. And then item number 3 is rental assistance. However, we're taking a little bit of a new flavor with this because the state, the Housing Finance Authority actually just allocated through the county, and there'll be discussions with BMAC about $500,000 for rental assistance. So we were thinking we wanted this money to be more impactful. So that 30% that we were thinking earmarking a rental assistance instead would go a mortgage assistance for folks who are having issues with their mortgage because of COVID. And again, that money would go to Blue Mountain Action Council. So we've been discussing all of this with the county. County's discussing it with BMAC and the Business Relief Fund, and that's just everything we're thinking of with this CDBG money, so that way all the organizations get that extra bonus money to be allocated toward these programs. Secondary item, and I just put a little snippet in here, because as we all know, this situation's ever evolving and ever changing. In fact, I'm waiting for a contract addendum, so I don't know all the ins and outs of it yet. But the state had leftover pass-through CARES grant money. So we received correspondence very late last week that emergency CARES money to be used for operations and things of that sort, that we would be getting an additional estimated $144,975 to be spent by November 30th. So I've asked department heads just to come up with the needs or where we think gaps are, and then I will get that information to you all. That grant that we're going to be getting from the state, I have yet to get the addendum to it. That was something that just came out at the very end of last week, so that one's a moving target. But I just want to make sure you were aware of both of those buckets of money that are coming.
Wow, that's a lot of buckets of money.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so any questions or comments? We'll start with Councilmember Bobbitt.
There's a lot of information. No questions at this time.
Okay. Councilmember Cleveland.
No questions.
Councilmember Peterson.
No questions.
Councilmember Nyhagen.
No questions, thank you.
Councilmember Selby.
No questions.
Okay. And Councilmember Trope.
No questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, next item is Mr. Carlton. So we'll give Mr. Rosatello a little break. And Mr. Carlton will present on the Questica software.
All right, I don't know if everybody recalled, but back in late 2018, a decision was made to move forward with some software package that will automate our budgeting process. My predecessor wasn't able to get that project completed, so that was one of my goals for this year, was to get that process up and running. What that does is it's a web-based tool that enables many people to work simultaneously on the budget. And it works at two levels: at an operating capacity, which is revenues and expenditures, and also a capital module. Where I would say I'm about 90% ready to move ahead with the operating component. So that would be the revenues and expenditures. And I'm just working on getting all the individuals set up so they can access their particular area of, or their department or cost center, however you want to call it, so they can enter their budget. I'll share my screen and I'll give you a little bit of a guide through the program, if I know how this works. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
So this is the main menu of Questica. Really what Questica does for us is it gets rid of all the manual spreadsheets that we prepare and use to populate the budget into Bias. We'll still have the budget in Bias, but we will export it directly from Questica and right into Bias. We still require to track our information by budget in Bias, but our main tool for budgeting. And to a bigger extent, it'll be a great tool to be able to do reporting out to the general public for budget and for actual expenses. So we are set up that what we do is we export our actual financials out of Bias every month and we load them into Questica. That way we can get actual and versus budget reporting on a consistent basis. Another tool that we may not implement this year, but there is an area that we can do budgeting by month. Historically, the budget has only been done on a yearly basis, and then your actuals are tracked as just a percentage of the budget, which, you know, depending on your movement in the months of your expenditures and revenues, sometimes doesn't paint a good picture in relation to your actual cost, because you may have expenditures that occur only in a short window of time. Maybe it's like once in the year you incur that expenditure and zero through the rest of the year. And my feeling is that you should be able to see it on a month-to-month basis, and then you can get a better picture of where you're at. So this main screen here, effectively where we are at is the 2021 budget has been loaded for the year, and basically it's the same numbers that were in the 2020 budget. That just gives us a starting point. So there is a lot of numbers here, and I don't know if you can see it. So you can see in the far right-hand column, there's the 2021 initial budget, which is basically the 2020 budget. So right now I'm developing access for all the individuals that will be completing their areas of the budget, and they will have access to their line items to go in and modify both the description and the dollar amounts that are in the budget. And that is a full year number, not the month number I was talking about. So this can be reported on in numerous ways. There's just a whole slew of reports that you can run and get. I've got one, I think I have it. If you just bear with me a second. I just have to wait for it to populate. So here you can see, here's our operating actuals versus budget history, showing the 19 actual, 19 budget, 20 actual, 20 budget, and the 21, well, there's no actual yet for 21, so that's blank. And then our 2021 budget, which, as I said earlier, is basically just a copy of the 2020 budget. And in this particular report,
Mr. Carlton, you're muted.
so this report is probably 200 or 300 pages long. It goes through all the cost centers, all the funds. So that's currently where we're at in the setup. A few things to tweak. I've got calls into Questica to help me out, and things aren't working exactly the way I was told they would work. I've got this report here. Oh, sorry, same report. Clicked the wrong one. And this software is like I said, is a web-based tool, so it's all saved up in the cloud. So just a little different report, breaks it out by fund, shows us, and it has a drill down capabilities, so you can drill down into revenues, expenditures, and you can drill down within each category. And this one is showing 2021 budget, but your parameters you can set up however you like. The real nice feature about Questica is it's got an attached piece of software that's called Open Book. And it's a system that you can feed out to the cloud to have people log into to look up reporting that you provide as being budget or actuals. And this isn't fully set up for us yet because we have to decide on which reports we want to upload and what we want to have available to the public. But for a start, we're just getting our data loaded, and we have a lot of opportunity before the end of the year to get this portion of the system up and running. Let me just see if I've got anything in there. So I did have a visualization set up to show you, but you'll have to forgive me. I'm new to this component. But this is sort of the thing you would see. There would be a link on our website that people would be able to come into and look at reporting. And we think it's going to be a great tool for information. And we'll also be able to build our budget book out of this system, so we won't have to manually do our budget book. We'll be able to use this program to build our budget book. So some great things. There's also a capital, which allows us to track all of our projects for budget and for actual reporting. So we're really happy with that. It's not completely set up. I have all the projects set up as they were to say the middle of June, but I don't have the items for the 2021 to 2026 CFP plan. But I have those, and they're all set up within this system, and we'll be able to interface with BIAS and bring all of our project costs in here and track them according to budget. So we feel this is going to be a great tool. And this will also be available in Open Book for reporting and whatever we need it to. So I think that's about all I have at this point. It's still a work in process, but from where it was a couple months ago to where it is now, we're pretty happy and definitely utilizing it for this year's budget cycle. Does anybody have any questions or want to see anything?
No, thank you.
Councilmember Peterson, there was does this application remove that nasty habit of the prior, trying to remember, if no funds were spent, it put the budget amount into actual, or do you remember that from last year?
Yeah, there was a part in BIAS that if you don't put a certain item into a line item, it copies the dollar value from the prior year into the next year's budget. We're not using BIAS to calculate our budget, so we won't have that problem.
So this, okay.
Yeah, we'll interface out of this Questica system straight into BIAS.
So that'll take care of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just a real quick follow-up, monthly budgeting, I really appreciate that. It's amazing when you sit down with directors and you find out that, oh yeah, we always buy that every November, you know, or the seasonality of what happens with expenses. It's, yeah, that's really good news if you can pull that off. Thank you.
Yeah, and you can get really sophisticated with this. It's really robust. And you can get into calculations and calculation templates. So you can do, you know, bell curve type expenditures, or you can do variable calculations where it says, you know, we only incur our expenses from June until September. And you can put in a calculation for that and spread it out. So it's really quite robust. And I'm hoping I have a chance to do that this year,
Eventually.
but we'll see. And as a matter of fact, Bias had also the same feature. You could do month-to-month budgeting within Bias. But the problem is we had to manually enter the budget into Bias. And there's already about 2,000 lines of code.
Yeah.
And that would multiply it by 12. So it just wasn't feasible.
Yeah.
But using formulas and whatnot within Questica, I think we can make that happen.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councilmember Bobbitt.
Yes, let me see if I understand this correctly. We talked about a budget book being produced in this web interface. So I assume that we as council members will have a login so we can go and review the preliminary budget with this app. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and we're planning to use it this year for our budget approval process.
Yes, accompanying, the traditional PowerPoint presentation. But yes, we can definitely use this tool to help out with that process.
Because I'm looking forward to it instead of the big printed one that's always out of date by the time we get to it.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your efforts and making that happen.
Councilmember Cleveland, any questions or comments?
No questions.
Councilmember Selby?
Did you say Selby?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, sorry. No, I don't have any questions.
Okay. Councilmember Trope?
No questions.
Okay. Mr. Carlton, let me see if I can phrase this question. Is this program at all going to be helpful with tracking like grant expenditures? Or is it not anything to do with grants, just our internal budget?
Well, it'll track the dollar amounts, but it won't track the grants in detail. It's really not designed. Desiree is looking at some programs for grant tracking, and she's going to come hopefully soon with a recommendation on if any of those packages will work for us, because it's definitely a void we currently have in finance, is having a mechanism for grant tracking.
Absolutely.
And as you are all aware, we have a number of grants, which is a good thing, but more work for finance.
Well, and I think if we're going to continue to cheer on Mr. Rizzatello and his grant efforts, we have to find a way to put more efficiencies in how much time it's taking up for staff to manage these grants. So, yep. All right. Any other questions before we move on to the next item? Yeah. Okay. Mr. Carlton, you're now going to discuss the 2021-2027 utility rate models.
Okay, let me just get myself onto the next item. So every 3 years, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Can you see my screen still?
No, all we see is the Zoom page.
Uh-oh, something's gone wacky on me here.
Stop the share and then restart it again.
Or you can hit new share, either way.
Or a combination of those two.
There we go.
So every 3 years, we're required to do a utility rate study. That would be for stormwater, wastewater, and water utility. In the prior years, we've had FSC Group has prepared the utility rate models for us. Mike and I decided this year that we were going to go ahead and complete it ourselves using their models, just updating it for actual financials and capital budgets and different scenarios within those models. So the last couple months I've been working on those prior models and updating it to where we currently are at. So I've basically taken the actual cost through 2019. The forecast numbers I presented to council, I think it was about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago now, with the 2020 forecast numbers for the full year, and extrapolated those numbers out, given the CPI index numbers that were in the prior models and just going with those, and then adding in the capital requirements through Mike's current CFP plan, preliminary plan, but what's in that model for the next 5 years. So those capital expenditures run through 2026. You can see the CIP is built in here, and I didn't quite get into necessarily the complete level of detail by project, but I loaded in, say, project summary information for each year, so we know what our capital requirements are going to be through 2026. Basically reviewing all the operating and maintenance costs for the year for those same years using the escalators that were built into the model. And then we would also, there's some of the assumptions. It breaks down escalation rates into construction inflation, labor inflation, benefit and cost inflation. And I basically left those numbers as they were in the model. You could debate, maybe they're a little too high, maybe they're a little too low, but I would think on average, I was pretty confident in using these numbers. So ultimately what we come up with is what rate we need to keep our funds in balance and within the statutory requirements of fund balance. And you can see on the screen in front of you, which is the stormwater model, you can see the rate increases that have been put in that make it work for us to keep in balance with our plans. So we're looking at this based on, you can see, I know it's hard to see the year there, it's not frozen. Let me just fix that. So you can see based on that, on this particular model, we would need in we have a 3% increase this year that was approved by council last fall. 2021, 3%. You can see how it flows through a slight increase in 2024 and 5% in 2025 and moving forward. Most of that is based on the capital funding requirements. We need to increase those rates in order to have enough funds set aside to fund those projects. Also with the capital funding, we also went through the different funding sources that we anticipate having, and those are used as well in the plan.
The one thing I feel I should add with the stormwater utility one is this was taken into account a worst case scenario. If we were have to do a regional detention basin and then get a grant for it, but then also put in our own money as well. The key thing we're going to try to do and mitigate that is that we did get a community development block grant for a dry well open the Central College place. It can be dealt with dry wells because they'll put us in a much better situation, but we won't have the results of that for like another year. So this is just so you can see what will happen if the dry well thing ends up not working. We have to do a giant detention basin.
Yeah, and to further Mike's comment, there is all the other models also. The wastewater model includes the upgrades at the wastewater treatment plant, which, depending on the funding sources for that, definitely affects the future beyond that project. And I can just bring that one up. So I was just going to comment. You can see on here it shows the anticipated forecasts and where we're at on dollar amount based on the operating expenses, debt service, how the total revenues are, existing debt service, and the rate funded capital. So you can see that definitely rate funded capital is a big impact on our utility rates, just because of the amount of work that needs to be done to keep the city working.
Councilmember Peterson, I have a question.
Yep.
And I don't want to go necessarily down that rabbit hole, but just your thoughts on this. As far as the escalators, is there a piece of this that looks at potential population growth or maybe even perhaps a facility growth versus is it the offset expense to supply that service, or is that a little bit too much in the weeds?
No, it does go through and does couple of the models work a little bit differently, but I'm not sure if this one has it, but one of the model has a factor that increases the growth in the utility. So it does take into fact that there'll be some growth.
In number of residents or a number of businesses or, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, they basically base it just on a percentage growth.
Sure. Okay.
And don't really identify it as, if it's a business or whether it's a residential.
Okay. Thank you.
And remember, these are estimates. So,
Sure.
The results are only as good as the estimates.
Got it.
And, a lot of it too, if we get all the funding that we hope to get on the wastewater treatment plant, then that changes the picture a lot. Or any of the other projects. If we get the right funding package, then it really helps us out.
Thank you.
So that's the stormwater utility. Here's the wastewater utility, and you can see that we had a 5% increase in 19, a 3% increase last year, and then we stay steady for a couple years. And remember that you'll be deciding near the end of the year if you approve these rate increases. So 2021 to 2023 is the period we'll be seeking approval. So right now those years are 3%, 4%, and 6%. But don't forget, with the wastewater, we have the Southwest Sewer Project going in, and the wastewater treatment plant in the foreseeable future. So I think, based on the funding options we have now, those rate increases are not that significant in my opinion, but I tried tweaking the numbers as much as we could, but the model, basically you load in the raw data and it spits out the results. So if you want to debate the logic in the program, we can surely talk about it. But I was pretty happy the way it come out. You can see the CIP input for wastewater. There's, $7 million, $8 million next year, and 2 years later, $19 million. So considerable investment in the utility in those years. The system also calculates all the debt amounts and any future debt. So it calculates the interest and principal payments that you'll have and brings that up into the summary, and it calculates into the rate. Then the last one is the water model. These look pretty similar because they're all done by the same company. So I think they do pretty much what I did and just modify it based on their formats. Here's a summary for the water model. Their rate increases stayed pretty consistent for 21 through 23. There was a 5% this year and projecting 5% for the next 3 years, and then it drops down. So, you know, we're paying for those wells right now. So that's the rate increase impact there. And you can definitely see how the rate increase is impacted. We can also look, all of them track the fund balances by our funds to show us, oh, something happened to this one. Bear with me a second. So you can see our ending balance in our funds. We stay in compliance with the minimum balances that it calculates. So in the water fund, we have a number of different funds. One's for the operating. There's Capital Reserve Fund 410, which pays for all the capital investments. That number builds up for the next, you know, right now we're paying for the well project, so that's going to draw down that fund balance for the next few years. And you can see we do stay in compliance, but you know, it does draw down even with the rate increases. Then we have, in addition to that, we have a debt service fund, which tracks all the debt and the payments on those. We do come a little short on our minimum target balance in some future years, and I was sure that was in compliance, but I need to look at that before we finalize the model. These aren't finalized, so we'll be presenting this again in the fall when we get you guys to approve the rate increases. So I'll have a look at that, not meeting the minimum target balance in those few years. So that's where we're at on the 3 rate models at this point. If anybody wants more detailed answers to some of the line items, just ask me now, or you know, give me a call or send me an email and ask me if you need something verified about the calculations.
Peterson, sorry. Just recently, we had a discussion about which one of these funds that we were looking at a rather significant increase in one of the months. And I know that you were, and I know this is tentative and that you have to look at this. Which fund was it that you were able to knock that rate increase down on? Was that the water?
Yeah, that was the water. It was up around 9%. You can see in 2019, it was 9%. And to be honest, I found an error in the rate model calculation. And that increase that it showed wasn't really reflected in the total revenues properly. So I fixed that mistake within the model, and these are calculating true increases.
Wow, it looks good. Thank you.
Yeah, in the initial model I started working with, if you took the increase here in the total revenues, one year to the next, they didn't correlate to the rate increase that was shown in the rate calculation.
Okay.
That's a good surprise. Thanks.
Okay, any questions or comments, Mr. Bobbitt?
A lot of information to plow through, but no comments or questions yet at this point.
It's a finance person's dream, let me tell you. Mr. Cleveland?
I'm not a finance person, but no questions.
Okay. All right, Mr. Peterson, anything more?
No, I think we have talked enough things.
Councilmember Nyhagan, any questions or comments?
No, and thank you for the work he does.
Yes. Councilmember Selby?
I appreciate your attention to detail, and as a ratepayer and a council person, I am happy that we are sticking to our guns so far and putting aside money for capital. It is so important. So I'm very pleased with that.
Excellent point. Councilmember Trope?
I'm very excited about the new system, particularly that ability to create those custom outputs. I forgot what they're called, but it would be really neat to have some opportunities to look at this. My experience last year felt like we looked at this at a micro level all the time. It'd be nice to be able to balance between micro, macro, and somewhere in between. It looks like we have that capability to parse the numbers a bit different. Great.
Yep. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Carlton. That was a lot of detail and attention to the work, so thank you very much for that.
Yeah, and just add one more comment. And of course, the capital could change depending on what happens to the CFP as we finalize the budget. So things could change, funding sources could change. So it's sort of a work in process. And I'll keep tweaking it and fine tuning it to get us more reliable.
Thank you.
Good job.
Okay, there are no informational reports in your package this week. So is there any other business for the good of the order?
Councilmember Peterson, I just meant to, well, last week, but what's the scenario for meeting again in person? Is it going to phase 8? I'm sorry, phase 4?
That would be at least phase 3. But currently the governor's order is through to October 1st. So, but
No, I just curious.
Even after that, the county would need to be in phase 3 at least.
Okay, and I'm sure we would social distance even then, perhaps. But yeah, I was just curious what the timeline looked like. Thank you.
Oops, sorry. Any other questions? Okay. Do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
This Councilmember Selby, I move to adjourn.
Councilmember Cleveland, second.
Great, thank you. So if there are no objections, we will adjourn the meeting at 8:19 p.m. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Stay safe.
Yeah.